Jake Morrison stood in the massive doorway of Nexus Prime and felt his stomach drop. The space station was bigger than anything he had ever seen. It stretched out like a metal city floating in the stars. Lights blinked everywhere, and strange sounds echoed through the corridors. He had worked on plenty of broken spaceships back on Earth, but this place made him feel very small. "Stay close to the group," Captain Roy Fletcher said in his military voice. "Remember, we are representing all of humanity here." Jake nodded and followed the captain down a long hallway. The other members of their team walked beside him. Lisa, Parker the smart scientist, was reading something on her tablet. Her eyes were wide as she looked at all the alien technology around them. The two other team members, Danny Walsh and Steve Kumar, looked just as nervous as Jake felt. They were the first humans to ever come to the Grand Trials. Earth had only been contacted by the Galactic Council 6 months ago. Before that, nobody in the galaxy even knew humans existed. Now Jake was supposed to compete against aliens who had been doing this for hundreds of years. The preparation hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see the top. Strange beings filled the space, and Jake tried not to stare. Some looked like walking crystals that sparkled in the light. Others were huge and covered in what looked like armor plating. There were floating energy beings that glowed different colors, and creatures that moved together like they shared one mind. As soon as Jake walked into the hall, everything went quiet. Then the laughter started. It began with a sound like breaking glass. Jake turned and saw one of the crystal beings making the noise. The creature was tall and thin, with sharp angles that caught the light. Other beings joined in with their own strange sounds. Some rumbled like thunder. Others buzzed like angry insects. "Look at this," rumbled a voice that shook the floor. Jake saw a massive creature with 4 arms and skin that looked like metal plates. The alien was at least 8 feet tall and probably weighed as much as a small car. "They sent a soft skin to compete with us." "It has no claws," said another voice. "No armor, no weapons. What kind of evolution made this weak thing?" Jake felt his face turn red. He had worked with his hands his whole life, fixing broken machines and building things from scrap metal. His hands were covered in small scars from years of hard work. But compared to these aliens, he probably did look soft. "Maybe it is some kind of joke," the crystal being said. Its voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "The new species sends us their weakest member for entertainment." More laughter filled the hall. Jake clenched his fists but kept his mouth shut. Captain Fletcher put a hand on his shoulder. "Ignore them," Fletcher whispered. "Show them what humans can do." Lisa looked up from her tablet. "Jake, the trials start tomorrow. There are 5 different challenges. Each one tests something different." She showed him the screen. Strength, speed, endurance, intelligence, and innovation. The current record holder is something called Vex Prime. Nobody has beaten its score in over 200 years. Jake studied the numbers on the screen. The scores were huge. He had no idea how he was supposed to compete with beings who could lift 10 times his weight or think faster than any computer. "The human probably cannot even lift the starting weights," laughed the 4-armed giant. "I am Brutus Karn, champion of the Karathi Empire. I have never seen such a pathetic competitor." "My calculations show 0 probability of success," said the crystal being. "I am Cristallo 7. My species has perfect memory and can solve any mathematical problem instantly. This human creature has no chance." Jake looked around the hall. Hundreds of aliens were staring at him. Some were pointing and making sounds that he guessed were laughter. Others were already ignoring him like he was not worth their attention. "They are placing bets," Lisa whispered, pointing to a group of floating creatures near the wall. "Most of them think you will be eliminated in the first few minutes." Jake walked over to a viewing screen that showed information about the trials. The strength test required lifting and moving objects that weighed thousands of pounds. The speed test was a maze filled with moving barriers and reaction challenges. The endurance test lasted for 2 full days without stopping. The intelligence test involved solving puzzles that the smartest beings in the galaxy had created. The innovation test required building something completely new. Each challenge looked impossible. Jake had always been good at fixing things, but he had never tried to compete with aliens who had evolved to be stronger, faster, and smarter than any human. The gravity chambers can simulate any planetary environment, Lisa read from her tablet. Most of these species come from worlds with different gravity than Earth. Some are stronger because their planets have higher gravity. Others are faster because they evolved to hunt in low gravity. Jake thought about his home planet. Earth had pretty normal gravity compared to most worlds, but it was still a tough place to live. Humans had to deal with weather, predators, and disasters. They had to work together and solve problems to survive. Maybe that counted for something. The human should withdraw now, Brutus Carn announced loudly. Save itself the embarrassment of failure. I agree, said Crystallos 7. There is no logical reason for it to continue. Jake looked at the giant alien, then at the crystal being, then at all the other creatures who were watching him like he was some kind of joke. He thought about his job back on Earth, working in a salvage yard and fixing broken spacecraft. He thought about all the times people had told him something could not be fixed, and he had proven them wrong. I am not withdrawing, Jake said quietly. The laughter got louder, but Jake just stood there looking at the trial information on the screen. He had work to do. Tomorrow he would show them what a human could accomplish. The first trial arena was bigger than 3 football fields put together. The ceiling was so high that clouds could have formed up there. Jake stood at the starting line and watched machines lower massive weights from the ceiling. Each weight was the size of a car and probably heavier than anything he had ever tried to lift. First competitor Brutus Carn of the Korathi Empire, announced a voice that echoed through the arena. The four-armed giant stepped forward. His metal-plated skin gleamed under the bright lights. Each of his arms was thicker than Jake's entire body. When he flexed, muscles bulged like mountains under his armor. Watch and learn, soft skin, Brutus Carn rumbled. He grabbed the first weight with 2 hands and lifted it like it was made of paper. The crowd of alien spectators cheered as he carried it across the arena. The weight that would have crushed Jake was just a warm-up for the Korathi warrior. Brutus Carn moved through the course like a machine built for destruction. He lifted weights that Jake could not even budge. He carried multiple objects at once, his 4 arms working together perfectly. When the gravity changed to simulate different planets, he barely slowed down. Brutus Carn scores 12,147 points, the announcer said. The alien crowd roared approval. Jake felt sweat on his palms. That score seemed impossible to beat. Next competitor, Crystallos 7 of the Zephyrian Collective. The crystal being approached the course differently than the Korathi. Where Brutus Carn had used pure strength, Crystallos 7 studied each challenge like a math problem. Jake watched as the alien calculated angles and leverage points. His crystal body was thin and looked fragile, but he moved with perfect precision. Instead of lifting weights directly, Crystallos 7 used simple machines. He built levers and pulleys from the equipment provided. His approach was slow but efficient. Every movement was calculated to use the least energy possible. Crystallos 7 scores 11,203 points, came the announcement. More cheers from the crowd. Jake was starting to understand that these beings had been competing for centuries. They knew exactly how to maximize their scores. Several other aliens completed the course. All of them scored over 9,000 points. When Jake's name was called, the arena fell almost silent. The few sounds he heard were alien chuckles and whispers. Next competitor, Jake Morrison of Earth. Even the announcer seemed to pause before saying Earth like he was not sure if it was a real place. Jake walked to the starting line. The first weight looked like a small building. He put his hands on it and tried to lift. It did not budge. Not even a little bit. More laughter from the crowd. Jake heard Brutus Carn's rumbling voice say something about weak humans. But Jake did not try to lift the weight again. Instead, he walked around it, studying its shape. He looked at the floor beneath it and the ceiling above it. He examined the other equipment scattered around the arena. Back on Earth, Jake had spent years working in salvage yards. When a spacecraft crashed, the parts were often twisted and stuck together. You could not just pull them apart with brute force. You had to understand how they were connected. You had to find the weak points and use leverage. Jake found a long metal beam and wedged it under the weight. He positioned another piece of equipment as a fulcrum. With the simple lever system, he could multiply his strength by 10. The weight rose off the ground. Not quickly, but it moved. The crowd noise changed. The laughter faded into confused murmurs. Jake carried his lever system to the next challenge. Where other competitors had tried to lift multiple weights at once, Jake built a simple pulley system. He could not match their strength, but he could work smarter. The gravity changes were harder to deal with. When the field shifted to simulate a high-gravity world, Jake felt like he weighed 3 times normal, but he had grown up on Earth, where the gravity was stronger than many alien homeworlds. His body was used to working under pressure. When the gravity shifted to simulate a low-gravity world, Jake felt almost weightless. The aliens who came from heavy gravity planets struggled with the change, but Jake adapted quickly. He had watched enough videos of astronauts working in space to understand how to move efficiently in low gravity. Jake worked methodically through each challenge. He was slower than the other competitors, but he finished every task. His lever systems and pulleys allowed him to move weights that should have been impossible for a human. Jake Morrison scores 8,847 points. The arena went completely quiet. Jake had not won, but he had scored respectably. He was in the middle of the pack, ahead of several alien competitors who had thousands of years of evolution on their side. Captain Fletcher was grinning from the observation deck. Lisa Parker was taking notes furiously on her tablet. The alien competitors were no longer laughing. "Impossible," Cristallo7 said, his crystal voice sharp with confusion. "The human should not have been able to complete the course." "Lucky," Brutus Karn growled, but he did not sound convinced. The second trial was announced immediately: the Speed Challenge. This time, the arena transformed into a 3-dimensional maze filled with moving barriers and sensor grids. Competitors had to navigate through the maze as quickly as possible, while avoiding obstacles that moved in complex patterns. Brutus Karn went first again. His massive size worked against him in the tight spaces of the maze, but his reflexes were incredible. He smashed through barriers that slowed him down and powered through the course with determination. His score was 15,674 points. Other competitors followed. The energy beings floated through spaces that solid creatures could not fit through. The ESO hive mind species coordinated their movements perfectly. All of them scored over 12,000 points. When Jake's turn came, the crowd was actually paying attention this time. The easy dismissal was gone. Now they were curious to see what the human would do. Jake stood at the entrance to the maze and did something none of the other competitors had done. He watched. For 5 full minutes he studied the moving barriers, timing their patterns and mapping their movements in his head. Back on Earth, Jake had spent countless hours playing 3-dimensional puzzle games and flight simulators. Games that the aliens probably considered primitive entertainment. But those games had taught Jake to think in 3 dimensions and to recognize patterns in complex moving systems. When Jake finally entered the maze, he moved with purpose. He did not have enhanced reflexes or supernatural speed, but he knew exactly where each barrier would be at each moment. He slipped through gaps that other competitors had not even noticed. He used momentum and timing instead of raw speed. Jake Morrison scores 13,191 points. This time, the silence lasted longer. Jake had placed 3rd overall. The human who was supposed to be eliminated in minutes had outperformed most of the galaxy's elite competitors. In the observation deck, alien officials were having urgent discussions. This was not supposed to happen. Jake walked off the course, breathing hard but smiling slightly. 2 trials down, 3 to go. The laughter had stopped completely. The 3rd trial was different from the first 2. Instead of a single challenge that lasted a few hours, the endurance trial would go on for 48 hours straight. Jake looked at the trial arena and saw exercise equipment, obstacle courses, and environmental chambers that could simulate any planet's conditions. "This is where your luck runs out, human," Brutus Karn said as they prepared for the trial. "Endurance is about more than clever tricks. It is about the strength of your body and spirit." Jake did not reply. He was busy studying the trial layout and planning his approach. Lisa Parker had given him detailed information about each competitor's biology. The crystal beings were strong, but their bodies could crack under stress. The four-armed warriors were built for short bursts of incredible power. The energy creatures could maintain steady output, but were vulnerable to certain environmental conditions. "Competitors will face changing environmental conditions every 6 hours," the announcer explained. "Extreme heat, cold, low oxygen, high pressure, and sensory interference. Points are awarded for completing tasks and maintaining performance over the full duration." The trial began at dawn on the station's artificial day cycle. All 23 competitors started together in a massive chamber filled with exercise equipment and obstacle courses. For the first 6 hours, everyone seemed strong. Brutus Karn dominated the strength-based tasks. Kristallos 7 calculated the most efficient paths through the obstacle courses. The Thessian collective moved like a perfectly coordinated machine, their individual drones working together without any need for communication. Jake paced himself carefully. He did not try to match the aliens' peak performance. Instead, he maintained a steady rhythm that he knew he could keep up for hours. Back on Earth, he had worked 12-hour shifts in the salvage yard without breaks. His body was used to sustained effort. The first environmental change came after 6 hours. The temperature dropped to simulate an ice world. Several competitors began to slow down immediately. The energy beings flickered as the cold affected their plasma fields. But Jake had grown up in Minnesota winters. Cold was nothing new to him. "The human is still maintaining pace," observed Kristallos 7, his crystal voice carrying a note of surprise. By the 12-hour mark, 3 competitors had dropped out. The extreme cold had caused stress fractures in 2 crystal beings. One of the energy creatures had destabilized completely. The environment changed again. Now they were in a high-pressure chamber that simulated a deep ocean world. Jake felt the pressure pushing against his body, but he had worked in deep-sea salvage operations before. He knew how to breathe efficiently and move carefully under pressure. Brutus Karn was struggling. His massive frame was built for explosive power, not sustained effort. After 18 hours, Jake could see the Karathi warrior beginning to tire. His forearms moved more slowly. His breathing was becoming labored. "Impossible," Brutus Karn panted during a brief rest period. "How is the soft skin still going strong?" Jake was not going strong. He was tired, hungry, and his muscles ached. But he was still going. That was the difference. The next environmental change brought extreme heat that simulated a desert world. More competitors began to falter. The Thessian collective's coordination started to break down as the heat affected their neural connections. Several individual drones collapsed, disrupting the hive mind's perfect teamwork. By the 24-hour mark, half the competitors had withdrawn. Jake was still moving steadily through the challenges. He was no longer in the middle of the pack. He was near the front. "This cannot be happening," Kristallos 7 said to another crystal being. "The human's biology should not allow for this level of endurance." But Jake's biology was exactly what allowed it. Humans were persistence hunters. His ancestors had chased prey across vast distances not by being faster or stronger, but by simply never giving up. They ran marathon distances in the heat of the African savanna, tracking animals until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. That genetic heritage was still in Jake's DNA. His body was designed for exactly this kind of challenge. The environmental conditions kept changing. Low oxygen that simulated a high-altitude world. Sensory interference that made it hard to see or hear. Each change eliminated more competitors. Brutus Karn finally collapsed after 39 hours. The mighty Karathi warrior had pushed his body beyond its limits, trying to keep up with the human. Medical drones rushed to help him as he was carried from the arena. "I do not understand," he gasped as he was loaded onto a stretcher. "How can something so weak be so strong?" Kristallos 7 lasted until hour 42 before stress fractures began spreading through his crystal matrix. He withdrew to prevent permanent damage to his structure. The Thessian collective's hive mind completely broke down at hour 44 when the sensory interference became too severe for their neural connections to function. The energy beings, who had seemed most likely to complete the full trial, began destabilizing one by one as the environmental stresses disrupted their plasma fields. With 6 hours left in the trial, only Jake and 3 other competitors remained active. But the other 3 were barely moving, just trying to survive until the time limit expired. Jake was still working. He was exhausted, and every muscle in his body hurt, but he was still completing tasks and moving through the obstacle courses. He had found a rhythm that he could maintain, and he stuck to it no matter what the environment threw at him. The alien spectators watched in stunned silence. What had started as entertainment had become something unprecedented. The primitive human was outlasting beings that had evolved for millions of years. 48 hours complete, the announcer finally said. Jake had not just finished the endurance trial, he had dominated it. While other competitors struggled to survive, he had maintained steady performance throughout the entire duration. Jake Morrison achieves a perfect endurance score of 20,000 points. This is the first perfect endurance score in the history of the Grand Trials. The arena erupted in noise, but it was not laughter this time. Aliens were cheering, arguing, and demanding explanations. Some called for the results to be reviewed. Others wanted to study human biology immediately. Jake just sat down heavily on a bench, pulled out a water bottle, and took a long drink. He looked like a tired construction worker after a long day, not like someone who had just made galactic history. Captain Fletcher was practically bouncing with excitement in the observation deck. Lisa Parker was frantically taking notes and recording everything. In the VIP section, Vex Prime's energy form flickered with what might have been concern. The humans' combined scores were climbing dangerously close to the all-time record. Jake stood up slowly and walked toward the exit. 2 more trials to go. The aliens were no longer laughing, but they were definitely watching very carefully now. The intelligence trial arena looked like the inside of a giant computer. Screens covered every wall, showing complex mathematical equations and 3-dimensional puzzles that hurt Jake's eyes just to look at. Tables were loaded with alien technology that he did not recognize. Everything in the room seemed designed to make him feel stupid. "Now we will see the truth about human intelligence," Cristallo 7 said, his crystal body sparkling under the bright lights. "This trial requires advanced mathematical processing and logical analysis, areas where my species excels." Jake nodded, but did not say anything. He had scored well in the previous trials by thinking differently than the aliens expected. Maybe that would work here too. Competitors will have 6 hours to complete as many challenges as possible, announced the trial coordinator. Points are awarded based on difficulty and accuracy. Some challenges require pure calculation. Others require understanding alien technology and systems. Cristallo 7 approached the first challenge station. The problem appeared on his screen as a complex equation with thousands of variables. Jake watched as the crystal being's body began to glow. Numbers and symbols flashed across the screen faster than Jake could follow. Within minutes, Cristallo 7 had solved a problem that would have taken human mathematicians weeks to complete. Challenge 1 complete, the system announced. Perfect accuracy, 2,147 points awarded. The Thessian collective approached a different station. Their multiple drones spread out and began working on different parts of a massive logic puzzle simultaneously. Jake could see them sharing information instantly through their hive mind connection. What would be impossible for a single being became manageable when dozens of minds worked together in perfect coordination. Other alien competitors attacked their chosen challenges with abilities that seemed like magic to Jake. Energy beings processed data by directly interfacing with computer systems. Karathi used their forearms to work on multiple problems at once. Jake walked slowly around the arena, looking at each challenge station. Most of them involved mathematics that was far beyond anything he had learned. Others required knowledge of physics and chemistry that human science had not yet discovered. But there were also practical challenges mixed in with the theoretical ones. Jake stopped at a station that displayed a piece of broken alien machinery. The challenge was to diagnose the problem and explain how to fix it. Jake had been fixing broken machines his entire life. He might not understand the alien technology, but he understood how mechanical systems worked. He picked up the device and turned it over in his hands, looking for obvious problems. The machine had what looked like a power coupling that was not quite aligned properly. 3 different alien competitors had already tried this challenge and failed. They had approached it as an engineering theory problem, trying to understand the device's purpose and design principles. Jake ignored the theory. He simply started taking the device apart to see how the pieces fit together. Within 20 minutes, he had identified the problem and reassembled the machine. It powered up immediately. Challenge 15 complete, the system announced. Innovative approach. 3,156 points awarded. Several aliens turned to stare at Jake. How had the primitive humans solved something that their advanced minds could not figure out? Jake moved to another practical challenge. This one involved analyzing a crystal matrix that was producing unstable energy readings. Again, alien competitors had tried to solve it through mathematical analysis of the crystal's molecular structure. Jake looked at the crystal differently. Back on Earth, he had worked with damaged power systems many times. Energy flow problems usually came from bad connections or irregular patterns in the conducting material. He traced the energy pathways through the crystal with his finger, looking for places where the flow seemed interrupted. He found a microscopic crack that was causing energy to leak. The crack was so small that it had not shown up in the aliens' detailed scans, but Jake's practical experience told him where to look. Challenge 22 complete, the system announced. Elegant solution. 2,934 points awarded. Cristallo 7's crystal voice carried a note of confusion. The human is solving problems through intuition rather than analysis. This should not be possible. But Jake was not working from intuition alone. He was working from pattern recognition developed through years of hands-on experience. When you had fixed thousands of different machines, you started to understand how broken things behaved regardless of their specific design. Jake found more practical challenges scattered throughout the arena. A communication device that needed to be repaired. A navigation system that was giving wrong readings. A power distribution network that was overloading certain circuits. Each time, Jake ignored the theoretical approach that the aliens favored. He treated each problem like a broken piece of equipment that needed to be fixed. His solutions were not mathematically elegant, but they worked. The aliens began to gather around Jake's stations to watch him work. They could not understand how someone with such limited technical knowledge was solving problems that stumped their greatest minds. The human approaches each challenge as if it were a mechanical puzzle, observed one of the energy beings. It does not try to understand the underlying principles. It simply manipulates the components until they function correctly. But that method should not work with advanced alien technology. Cristallo 7 protested. These systems required deep, theoretical understanding. Jake finished his 6th practical challenge and looked around for more. Most of the remaining problems were pure mathematics or required knowledge of alien science that he simply did not have. But he had scored points on every practical challenge in the arena. Time remaining, 30 minutes, the system announced. Jake walked over to a challenge that had defeated several other competitors. It involved reverse engineering a piece of alien technology and explaining how it worked. The device was unlike anything Jake had ever seen, but it had familiar mechanical elements mixed with the alien components. Jake started disassembling the device systematically. He laid out each piece in order and studied how they connected to each other. The aliens had tried to understand the device's purpose first, then work backward to explain its function. Jake worked the opposite way. He figured out what each piece did, then put together the overall picture. The device was a sophisticated sensor array, but it was built using the same basic principles as electronic equipment on Earth. Jake traced the signal pathways and identified the key components. His explanation was simple and practical rather than technical, but it was completely accurate. Challenge 31 complete, the system announced. Comprehensive analysis. 4,123 points awarded. Time expired, came the final announcement. Calculating final scores. Jake had completed 12 challenges out of 43 available. Cristallo 7 had completed 28 challenges with mathematical precision. The Thessian Collective had completed 25 challenges through perfect coordination. But Jake's practical approach had earned him high point values for innovative thinking and elegant solutions. Jake Morrison final score 16,789 points, the announcer said. It was not the highest score. Cristallo 7 had earned 18,934 points through pure computational power, but Jake had performed well enough to maintain his overall lead going into the final trial. More importantly, he had shown the aliens something they had never seen before. Sometimes practical experience and intuitive problem-solving could accomplish things that pure intelligence could not. In the VIP section, Vex Prime's energy form was flickering rapidly. The mathematics were becoming very clear. If the human performed, even moderately well in the final innovation trial, the 200-year-old galactic record would fall. Jake walked out of the intelligence arena feeling tired but satisfied. He had one more trial to go. The hardest one. But he was still in the running, and that was more than anyone had expected when this whole thing started. The aliens were no longer underestimating him. Now they were trying to figure out how to stop him. The final trial arena was different from all the others. Instead of preset challenges, it was filled with raw materials and fabrication equipment. Tables held metal pieces, crystal components, energy cells, and tools that Jake had never seen before. The space looked like the galaxy's most advanced workshop. The innovation trial requires creating something entirely new, the announcer explained. Your challenge is to design and build a device that can stabilize a collapsing micro-wormhole while extracting usable energy from it. Previous attempts by the galaxy's greatest minds have failed. You have 12 hours. Jake stared at the micro-wormhole, contained in a force field at the center of the arena. It looked like a tiny black hole surrounded by crackling energy. Every few seconds it would pulse and distort, sending waves of gravitational force rippling through space. This problem has been studied for centuries, Cristallo 7 said, his crystal voice filled with confidence. Only advanced mathematical modeling can provide a solution. Brutus Karn, who had recovered from the endurance trial, flexed his forearms. The Karathi approach will be to contain the wormhole through brute force engineering. Jake walked around the wormhole, studying it from different angles. The other competitors immediately began building their devices. Cristallo 7 started constructing a precise crystalline matrix based on complex calculations. The Thessian Collective built multiple smaller devices designed to work together. Brutus Karn welded together a massive containment structure. Jake just watched and listened. For the first hour, he did not build anything. He stood near the wormhole and observed how it behaved. The pulses came in irregular patterns, but Jake started to notice subtle rhythms within the chaos. It reminded him of a damaged engine that was misfiring. Back on Earth, Jake had fixed engines that everyone else said were beyond repair. The secret was not to fight against the damage, but to work with it. Sometimes a broken engine could be made to run better than it had when it was new, if you understood how to use its quirks. Brutus Karn finished his containment structure first. It was a masterpiece of engineering, built to withstand incredible forces. When he activated it, the structure successfully contained the wormhole for almost 4 minutes before the gravitational stress tore it apart. Brutus Karn scores 2,847 points for innovative containment design, the announcer said. Cristallo 7's approach was more elegant. His crystalline matrix was designed to resonate with the wormhole's energy frequency and cancel out its instabilities. The device worked perfectly for exactly 4.7 seconds before the resonance cascade destroyed the crystal structure. Cristallo 7 scores 8,934 points for advanced theoretical application, came the announcement. The Thessian Collective's coordinated approach showed the most promise. Their multiple devices worked together to create a stabilization field that adapted to the wormhole's changes. But the quantum fluctuations eventually overwhelmed their coordination system. Thessian Collective scores 11,205 points for innovative, cooperative design, the announcer said. One by one, the other competitors tried and failed. Each approach was scientifically sound and built on centuries of advanced knowledge. but none of them could handle the chaotic nature of the wormhole's behavior. Then Vex Prime himself descended from the VIP section to attempt the challenge. His energy form interfaced directly with the micro-wormhole, trying to stabilize it through pure energy manipulation. For several minutes, it looked like he might succeed. His energy matrix began to calm the gravitational fluctuations, but the power requirements proved too great even for his advanced form. The wormhole's chaotic energy eventually destabilized Vex Prime's matrix, forcing him to withdraw. Vex Prime scores 15,678 points for direct energy interface methodology, the announcer said. Now it was Jake's turn. He had been watching for over 6 hours, and all the other competitors had failed. The alien spectators were silent, wondering what the human could possibly do that their greatest minds could not. Jake approached his workstation and began building something that looked completely different from the other devices. He took pieces from all the failed approaches, crystalline components from Cristallo 7's design, coordination circuits from the Thessian device, heavy-duty materials from Brutus Carn's structure, energy management systems inspired by Vex Prime's attempt. But the way Jake combined these elements was purely human. Instead of trying to control the wormhole's chaos, he built a device that would ride the instability like a surfer riding a wave. The aliens had all tried to impose order on the chaotic system. Jake's device was designed to be chaotic too. It had flexible joints that could bend and twist, adaptive circuits that changed their configuration in real time, variable resonance chambers that could shift frequencies instantly. "What is the human building?" Cristallo 7 asked another crystal being. "That design violates all principles of stable engineering." Jake spent 2 hours assembling his device. It looked like a mechanical creature rather than a scientific instrument. Moving parts connected to adaptive systems connected to flexible energy conduits. Nothing about it seemed rigid or precisely calculated. When Jake activated his device near the wormhole, something unprecedented happened. Instead of fighting against the gravitational fluctuations, the device moved with them. Each pulse that would have destroyed a rigid system instead powered Jake's adaptive design. The device danced around the wormhole, its flexible components bending and shifting in response to each gravitational wave. But instead of being damaged by the chaos, it used the energy to become more stable. Within an hour, Jake's device was not just surviving the wormhole's instability, it was feeding off it. The chaotic energy was being converted into usable power while simultaneously stabilizing the wormhole itself. The alien spectators watched in absolute silence as energy readings climbed beyond anything in galactic history. Jake's device was creating a feedback loop that made both the wormhole and the device more stable, with each passing minute. 12 hours complete, the announcer finally said. Jake Morrison's device remains operational and continues to improve. Performance. The arena was completely silent except for the hum of Jake's creation. Jake Morrison scores 19,847 points for revolutionary adaptive engineering. The numbers appeared on the main display. Jake's total score, 78,374 points. Vex Prime's 200-year-old record of 71,205 points had been shattered by over 7,000 points. The arena erupted in chaos. Some aliens cheered. Others argued that the results were impossible. Still others demanded to examine Jake's device immediately. But Jake just stood there covered in grease and metal shavings, looking at his creation with the same satisfaction he felt after fixing a particularly stubborn engine. Vex Prime approached Jake directly, his energy form flickering with what seemed like respect. "How did you accomplish what we could not?" Jake thought about the question seriously, then shrugged. "I guess I just treated it like a broken machine that needed fixing instead of a scientific problem that needed solving." The response was translated into dozens of alien languages, but the meaning was clear. Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to approach it like a human. Captain Fletcher was shouting with joy in the observation deck. Lisa Parker was crying and laughing at the same time. The alien officials were having urgent meetings about what Jake's victory meant for galactic politics. But Jake was already thinking about home. He had a repair shop waiting for him on Earth, and after all this excitement, the quiet work of fixing everyday machines sounded pretty good. As the human delegation prepared to leave Nexus Prime, Jake carried with him more than just a galactic record. He had shown the universe that sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The aliens would never look at humanity the same way again. And Jake Morrison, the mechanic from Earth, had become a legend across the galaxy. But first he had some engines to fix back home.